Hey, aloha everybody, and welcome to the ThinkTech Hawaii studio for another episode of Security Matters. Today our guest is, this is a ThinkTech level discussion, so I hope you guys can keep up. Lynn Mattice is with us. He brings absolutely decades of global enterprise risk experience to the table. And we're happy to get him on today, got onto his calendar. And we'll take this discussion broad, then we'll try to bring it narrow, then maybe we'll broaden it up again at the end. But Lynn, I truly appreciate you joining me today. How are you doing there, sir?
I'm doing fine. Aloha from Washington, D.C. to everybody in Hawaii.
Love that shirt, man. You outclassed me today. I didn't even put on an aloha shirt, so thank you.
I did it in honor of the show.
That's awesome. Let's go ahead and give our guests, for those who may not know you, just your background, as much as you'd care to share. I know it's in these times of social media, we don't give everything away anymore, but I'll let you take them through your history.
Well, everything's pretty much out on the social media about me. I've been in this a long time. So I've been in the industry for more years than I care to remember. But I spent over 25 years with three major global corporations as senior executive, and I had a broad range of responsibilities that included enterprise risk management, business intelligence, cybersecurity, corporate security, business continuity planning, now we call resiliency, corporate aviation, brand protection, just about the entire gamut of everything you can think of that really looks at what a risk an enterprise faces and then looks at what types of solutions are available to the enterprise to be able to help mitigate and offset those risks.
Yeah, so to that end, I know you had a paper out recently in Security Technology Executive, so we'll touch on some of that. Enterprise, not even enterprise, government, no one was prepared, I don't think, for this current pandemic. And we did have, prior knowledge. We had the Spanish flu there. We had MERS and SARS. There was an inkling of it out there, but it really seems to have caught globally. This is not a knock on any particular government or organization. Is that from where you sit? If you took the global perspective, do you think everyone just kind of missed the boat?
Well, I think part of what was the real root cause of this pandemic spreading the way that it did is the lack of information or the suppression of information that came out of China when this started. Had people been able to provide information early on, like the attempt of the one doctor in Wuhan, who was then sanctioned for his putting social media posts out about the activity and then having to retract it, that it wasn't a problem, one has to question what the motivation was behind the Chinese actions. But then when you're dealing with a communist totalitarian society, you have to, understand that they're not going to send any information out that's going to in any way have any kind of negative image whatsoever of what they're trying to accomplish as a society.
Mm. Yeah, so in a time when, of human need, let's just call it that, right? Is the rest of the globe, the other organizations that you work with, do they have that same feeling that, China, just from a human perspective, owed us a little more than they gave us there? I mean, they really didn't take much responsibility, and definitely not early on.
Well, they owe us a whole lot more, frankly. They're at the root of this. And if you look at the statistical data, they knew that this was occurring, and yet they let over 5 million people leave Wuhan and travel all over the world, as well as throughout China. You can't slow a pandemic when you have those kinds of activities taking place. And those are global challenges that a responsible administration or organization, country, nation, state has a responsibility to the rest of the world.
Yeah, we're close to China here. We're in Hawaii. Obviously, we have a lot of Chinese visitors, and we didn't get impacted early on, but it seems that travel bit, this was on everyone's doorstep. And then maybe, do you think government and business, did we react slower? I know I saw some enterprises, some global enterprises, we don't need to name, but they were taking action, telling their people to stay home, moving to remote operations before even, some of the governments were doing it here in the United States. And I don't know if that was the same, globally, where the governments, did they just appear slow because they're in the news and businesses moved quicker? Or was it just kind of the same thing? Everybody waiting on government to tell us what to do?
Well, part of that comes, in this country, comes down to a liability issue.
Okay.
We're the most litigious country in the world. And so liability is always an issue. And so, people don't want to act that's going to have a potential negative impact on them, either from a liability standpoint or fiduciary standpoint. Enterprises are very concerned about their bottom line. We went from long-term strategic planning to quarter with, responding to everything that Wall Street wants. And then, we're to the point now that most corporations are looking at their weekly data.
Wow.
You can't run an enterprise long-term and protect the shareholder value of an enterprise if you're too concerned about what's happening every minute. You have to be concerned for the long term, and there's going to be some positive things, there's going to be some negative things. That's all about risk management. I saw a recent study that was done by some university professors out of Europe. Two separate universities, these professors got together and did an in-depth look at enterprise risk management. And they looked at enterprises that had adopted it. And if you look at the 5-level maturity model that's typical that you look at when you're looking at the maturity of a given process, they found that those companies that had implemented enterprise risk management, even at the lowest level, which would be ad hoc or initial in most cases when you look at how models are designed, up to the 5 top steps, which the 5th step is either managed or optimized. At the bottom level of the steps, they found that on average, those companies that had implemented enterprise risk management added an entire 5% valuation to the enterprise.
Wow.
And then for each step that they went above on the 5-step scale, they added an additional 5% on each step. So if you're up to the managed or optimized level, you're adding 25% valuation to your enterprise.
Wow.
Just by the way you manage risk.
I've got to believe that that's some of these larger multinational enterprises that we saw moving early. I think they may have had visibility into China that other people didn't have, right? Because they had operations there, be it manufacturing or whatever. So I thought that was an early sort of bellwether, like, wow, if I see these big companies, I'm hearing that their employees are getting stay home orders. Why aren't the governments doing that? So could you compare for us at all what you saw happen in the U.S. with what we saw like with our partners in Europe or Australia? I know there have been some countries that did better than others. Do you have an opinion or sort of some information about that? How well did we do identifying the risk and then getting our stuff moving?
Well, I'm not sure any of the countries really did a better job of identifying the risk earlier than we did.
Okay.
I think the response was different in that those countries that required their people to wear masks and, they didn't have the attitude that I have a constitutional right, I don't have to wear it if I don't want to attitude of a lot of people in the United States have.
Yeah.
But the people that aren't wearing a mask in the United States aren't taking into account what they're doing impacting other people. And, it's okay if you don't want to wear one, then just stay away from everybody else, So, you don't have a right to impact other people just because you don't want to do something. So because you're infringing on their rights, you're infringing on their health. And those countries that implemented that, take Taiwan, for instance. Taiwan implemented, I know China doesn't like us to call that a country, but that's too bad, Wuhan. The fact that they had only about 600 cases in total, and they only had, I believe it was less than 12 deaths associated with it. But then again, you've got a situation where, they get hit by so much smog coming over from China, mainland China, that everybody's used to wearing masks over there. So they wear masks on a regular basis, and it's not a social issue for them to not wear one.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that they were masked, so fully. So that's interesting. That social stigma, whatever it is, where Americans just don't like to be inconvenienced, right? We've always fought that battle, security versus convenience, right? Regardless at any level. So now even to mask wearing.
Think of this, Andrew. If before the pandemic hit, you walked into a bank with a mask on, you're going to get shot.
Yeah, or anywhere, right? Like your corner store.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm concerned at the sort of the impact. So supply chain. Let's talk about supply chain for a minute and try to keep it sort of global out there. I know EarthX is going on this month. What changes do you hear people talking about now? Because I know government's trying to say, oh, we got to insource manufacturing, but businesses have to make decisions, to, as you mentioned earlier, to meet their stockholders' demands or whatever it may be. What do you think for the United States? What are these big companies talking about long-term for this supply chain impact from this pandemic? Because the economy looks like it's going to suffer. Can they leverage things in there because they have resources, or are they sort of at the same mercy to a poor economy as the smaller businesses in the world, you might say?
Well, I think there's in fact, I'm writing an article right now for publication on dealing with what I believe is going to be the new tidal wave of shareholder derivative lawsuits. CEOs have known for a long time of the risks that are in China, and they've operated in what I refer to as the ostrich theory of management. They buried their head in the sand and said, this is 1.4 billion people, we've got to take advantage of it. Well, guess what's happening in China? Just exactly what we've been predicting for a long time. The Chinese government is in the process now of creating new companies to replace Western companies to support all activities in the consumer market within China. They're basically going to be almost closing their borders to outside activities, outside those that they need to have in there so that they can continue to steal their technology and be able to replace it or leapfrog them in the marketplace. And that's a huge challenge that American companies have been ignoring for many, many years. And it wasn't until, frankly, this administration, and I'm agnostic from a political standpoint. I believe in being an independent, and so I'm very nonpartisan. But at the Executive Summit Series program, our annual conference that we put on last year, I had Bill Evanina, who's the National Counterintelligence Executive, speaking. And let me say, I didn't have him speaking. I interview them because I found that government personnel love to give presentations, but they have to get everything approved in advance in that presentation. Yeah. So those presentations are typically very platitudinal. Nothing against that, but you don't get to the meat of the issues. So I found that the best way to do that is to do an interview.
Sure.
And so interviewing Bill Evanina, one of the things I asked him, since he'd been in the position since 2014 under the Obama administration, where he was originally appointed, I asked him to tell me the differences between his experiences between the two administrations, because vastly different in the philosophies and methodologies of the two administrations. And because he's been doing such an incredible job in bringing awareness to the risks associated with what China is doing these days. And he said, in all honesty, he said, I attempted to do the kinds of briefings and information spreading that I'm doing now under this administration, but I was told to stop, sit down, and shut up.
Wow.
And so he said, I'm delighted with that. I have the opportunity now, because he's a long-term historical guy from a counterintelligence standpoint. And so he's known what the risks are for a long time, and he wanted to seriously do something about it. And one of the other things I do is I run a nonprofit called the National Economic Security Alliance. And we did a study based on what had happened from 1994 to 2011. And that study showed that when the National Counterintelligence Center stood up in 1994, Their first report on economic espionage that they issued indicated that government was aware of 8 countries that were actively and aggressively stealing technology from the United States. So in 1996, due some pressure from the National Intellectual Property Law Institute, who drafted a couple of acts, the Economic Espionage Act and the National Trade Secrets Act of 1996 were established and approved by Congress and signed by the president. The problem is that each year, as they reported these economic espionage reports, up until 2011, because it appeared that it became politically untenable to keep reporting this, is in 2011, the report indicated the government was now aware of over 140 countries that were actively and aggressively stealing technology from the United States.
Wow.
And one of the problems with that is that between 1996, when the law was issued, and 2011, okay, the Justice Department had only prosecuted 12 cases of economic espionage.
Wow.
So there was no downside to any of these nation states for stealing everything they could steal from us. And then you wonder how come we ended up losing millions of jobs and millions of companies being closed and moved overseas. You can't operate in those kinds of environments and be able to protect yourself effectively.
Wow.
And I don't care. I've had cyber as part of my operations, and I'm a member of a number of organizations that are highly recognized in the cyber world. And you can't stop a nation state. I don't care how good you are in cyber. If a nation state wants to get in and attack your information, they're going to. But what we've seen from the Chinese is they have had the most sophisticated intelligence operation that this country has ever seen. And it's having a devastating impact on us. And then you couple that with good old American greed, and you see situations where you have an individual like this professor out of Harvard who was being paid by the United States government to do advanced nanotechnology research, and he had a nanotechnology center at Harvard University, and he ended up receiving $1.5 million from the Chinese and a $50,000 a month stipend to set up a duplicate nanotechnology center in a university in China. And he took all of the information he had out of the Harvard activity and take it and put it into the Chinese operation.
Yeah.
Of course, we have to couch this and say he was alleged to having done this.
Yeah. There's a lot of that alleged activity that's starting to come to light right now. And it's
Exactly.
It's as if we not only had the keys to the castle, we handed it to them, then we moved the castle over, we built it all for them. We're going to jump away and pay a couple of bills. We're going to be right back in 1 minute. Just sit tight, everybody. Hey, aloha, and welcome back to Security Matters. We're back with Lynn Mattice, and we were just getting a bit of education of how long this sort of economic theft, economic repatriation, the sort of the movement of what it is that made America great out of America by, basically illegal means, espionage, and corporate in a lot of cases negligence. Where we just didn't pay enough attention to what was happening to us because it looked like we could maybe make more money chasing what do you call it, a Chinese panda, maybe. I'm not sure what it is at that level, Lynn. But let's get back to that. So from the perspective of these companies, letting everything go, from our governments paying for this R&D at advanced levels and that stuff trickling over, what's been the wake up call? Did it take this pandemic, or has there been more of a movement? I know inside the DIB, in the defense industrial base, obviously there's been an awakening there. Everybody talks about the F-35, but we saw a lot of our other military technologies showing up over in China. But what about for the business sector? Was there a bell before the pandemic? Has this been something they've been paying attention to?
Well, I think the big change goes back to Bill Evanine again, and I keep bringing him up because the phenomenal work that he's done. Before this administration came in, I had a meeting with him, and I showed him the research data that we had done on that period of time and the losses that were anticipated out of the theft of intellectual property, trade secrets, proprietary information, and the like. And we projected from 1995 until 2011 that the country had lost somewhere in the range of $20 trillion in GDP that we would have gained otherwise had we not had all of these losses. So you come back to the philosophy of having industrial policy or not. Well, all my years in dealing with the government, and I've served on a lot of panels and advisory councils and things of that nature, and the government's general attitude is that business is on its own. It's not the business of the government to help business. And so I've spent a lot of time out of our nonprofit, focused on the economic security of the country, and that economic security is the number one national security issue we face. Yeah. And so we have done a lot of white papers and a lot of briefings of administrations over the years, and we started having impact with the George W. Bush, and he was one of the first presidents that really started talking about economic security being a national security issue. And then he continued on the Obama administration, and of course, that's the centerpiece of this administration, is the economic security of the country. We need to focus on our security first before we start worrying about the rest of the world. We have a lot of people out of work. We have a lot of, we had the best economy in the world, until the pandemic hit. And, you hear conspiracy theorists and, you look at what to believe and what not to believe, but there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that believe that China actually let the 5 million people leave Wuhan on purpose because they understood the potential impact of this, and they didn't want to be the only economy in the world that was impacted by it. Then the other conspiracy theorists believe that this was an attempt by the Chinese to test out biological weaponry and see how fast a pandemic could spread if it was spread around the world. Well, we certainly have a lot of data on that now. So I don't know which of those to believe, but in all honesty, if you look at the Chinese Communist Party and the hardening of what they're doing, what they've done to the 1 million+ Uyghurs that they've got in concentration camps and forced work programs and things of that nature, they don't have a real great track record. And they really don't seem to care too much what anybody else thinks. And I think they have to come to a reckoning of public or global responsibility for their actions. And, take a look at their actions in the South China Sea, where they're basically annexing things. And we were talking during the break, I had a briefing from the Military Transportation Command, and they showed me a chart that showed all the ports around the world that the Chinese have taken control of, and the other ones that the Russians have taken control of, because they're in cahoots with each other now quite extensively. They used to hate each other, but now they believe that they need to cooperate with each other to be able to counter Western societies. And
Mhm.
I guess they haven't figured out that Western societies don't want to attack them. Western societies don't want to eliminate them from the face of the earth. They just want them to act like responsible global citizens.
Sure.
And for some reason, neither the Chinese nor the Russians believe that they need to operate that way. They're more concerned about, their own philosophies and their own approach rather than properly fitting into a global world.
Yeah, it seems so dated. Like we started to talk about the global. We spearheaded getting the global economy started. Actually, if you ask me, by
Yep.
outsourcing a lot of the work that we did. By we sold the things that we made to other countries. We sort of exported modern living, you might say, right? And then it does not feel like, since the Cold War ended, that there's been an extension of that into these other countries and I don't know if maybe they're just too immature to see what we see, to see it the way that we see it, to see the benefits that we see. We're only 350 million of us, right? We're just not that big of a country as the United States. So I don't see why they wouldn't just, like to join in and see, it's an interesting thing to me that there's so much strife, and that even, we see something like this pandemic, and because of its severity, it increases the divisiveness, right? And so I don't know, what do you think it's going to take to bring these things together? You mentioned, like a global focus, like push back globally. You think that's got to be economic? Has it got to be sanctions as well? How can our global partners help us, sort of put I don't know what it is, either a cap on it or comfort with these foes of ours, that there's not a long-term win there for anybody.
Well, I look at the development of what took place in China. Again, it comes back to, low-cost manufacturing, and we saw the same thing happen in Japan as following World War II. Low-cost manufacturing, quality wasn't that great, and then they became a global behemoth. The same things happened in China, but China's got a different attitude because they feel that it's their rightful place in the world to be the dominant leader, and they went for centuries as the top organization, and then they had that period of time where they, basically collapsed when they implemented total totalitarianism and communism across the country. And then they fell away from everything because they were in such isolationists. Then when you look at, had American companies and European countries focus on Central and South America, and then the development that we did in China, in Central and South America, think of the strength of the Western Hemisphere today and the ability for Western society to be able to dominate the discussions globally, and what the norms will be, and what's acceptable behavior, because you're talking about such global economic strength. If we had done something of that nature, and we wouldn't be dealing with the issues we're dealing with in South America today.
Yeah.
Central America.
But hopefully we'll see a pivot back to something that makes sense for us globally. The pandemic has surely put the world on its ear, and if it's not a wake-up call for everybody, I don't know what it's going to take. Well, Lynn, I appreciate you sharing with us today. Just maybe your final thoughts here as we wrap up. What do you think the world can do, man? That's a big question.
Well, I think we have to change the attitude of basically the lemon methodology of following what everybody else was doing. Okay. Lemmings have a tendency to do that. CEOs have a tendency to be lemmings. And so what we want to do is we want to focus on what makes the most sense, and not necessarily what is the shortest term gain. One of the problems we run into, we've done studies in our nonprofit, is the average tenure of a CEO 20 years ago was about 15 years. And so long-term strategic planning was a critical factor. And then the Wall Street and Harvard got together and came up with this great idea of creating stock options for management to drive shareholder value. And if you look at the activities that have resulted in the short-term thinking associated with just driving stock price only and not the long-term health and value of the enterprise, the studies have shown now that the average CEO term is about 3 years. So they get in, do their big hit, get out, go someplace else, and it's the next CEO's problem to deal with.
Wow.
So we've got this vicious cycle taking place. But I think companies have to start learning to be more responsible globally. And, you know, I think, again, going back to Bill Evanina, a lot of the change is starting to take place because he's briefed over 1,000 CEOs and over 100 university presidents, giving them top secret briefings on the risk and threats that they're facing from China and some of the other global players that are out there. But nobody's as aggressive and as active as China has been on this. And everybody has to be very wary about that and start to look at it in a completely different fashion. And I think in the long term, we have to move quickly or we're going to risk being a third world country. I mean, look at the latest thing with TikTok, okay? The Chinese government came out and said, well, if you're going to sell the US piece of it, you can't transfer the AI, the artificial intelligence data outside the country. Well, where did they get the AI to start with? They stole it from us, you know, but now they're going to prevent it from being transferred back to us because this is a thing we've been warning about a long time. When you don't have to go through, as Edison said, I found 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb, okay? But then he finally landed on one. When you're doing research and development, you have a lot of investment in finding the ways it doesn't work, okay? But if you can steal how it works and take it in and put it to work and then leapfrog because you'd have had to go through all those different problems to get to where you got to that you now need to recover from, now you're in a situation where you're behind the power curve. The other thing that's happened extensively is the Chinese have stolen a lot of data and immediately patented it before United States companies could patent their own data. And so they're locked out of markets around the world because they can no longer market a product they developed because the Chinese say they developed it first. And you have to then have lengthy court battles, and it gets really, really complex. And very few companies have won court battles in China or with China when it deals with intellectual property rights.
Man, it seems like it's been a full frontal assault, and you know, it's time for us to pay attention. Lynn, I really appreciate your insights today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. I think we could take and unpack some of these topics for hours. So maybe we'll have to work on a couple more sessions to share some of that stuff that you got going on in your head there, sir.
I'd be delighted to. I'd be delighted to.
I love it. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you guys all again. Aloha.
Aloha.